Vaccine administrations have now kick-started for those between the ages of 12 and 17. The new age group is receiving a single dose of the Pfizer vaccine. Our reporter, Sekohacho Moahi, caught up with one of the teenagers who received her COVID-19 vaccine dose and welcomed the process of rollouts for youngsters.
I'm going to visit my country, that's why I need to get vaccinated.
Okay. All right. Would you motivate and encourage others to do the same?
Yes. We all must get vaccinated because the COVID is very bad. Many people died, so we all must get.
Well, as you can see, today, the first time that children between the age of 12 and 17 are able to get a vaccine for COVID-19. They're getting one jab of the Pfizer vaccine. That's led to the discussion around the issue of parental consent, the fact that children from the age of 12 don't need parental consent for a vaccine. Talk Mapumulo is a senior associate at Adams & Adams, an attorney there. Talk, good afternoon to you. These issues are always going to be contentious. I think we all know this. They're governed, as I understand it, by the Children's Act. What does the Act say about vaccines and children?
A very good afternoon, Stephen, and to your viewers. Certainly, there are going to be issues when it comes to the issue of consent in relation to children and the medical treatment and the vaccinations. So what the Children's Act in terms of, Section 129, it states that, the child has to be of the age of 12. For them to consent to their own medical treatment. It doesn't necessarily say vaccinations, but in a broader interpretation of treatment, medical treatment, that would also include vaccinations. But the age factor is just one of the two requirements. The second requirement is that of mental capacity of the child to understand and fully appreciate the benefits, the risks, as well as the goods or the benefits rather of the vaccine. So those are the two main factors insofar as the consent of the minor child is concerned.
Is it spelled out how that capacity is judged? I mean, it can be quite difficult. I mean, there'll be some 18-year-olds who maybe sort of lack the capacity to make a decision like this. How do you decide if a 12-year-old is able to make a decision like this?
So the case law there's a plethora of cases that have looked at this particular element of mental capacity. So broadly, it would include things like, you look at the maturity of the child, you look at the child's upbringing, you look at the child's background, the socio-economic factors may also play a role in the child's understanding of the vaccines and the medical treatment in general. And also you look at the schooling of the child and all those factors. So it's quite a broad, it's a broadly defined term, or rather a legal principle, when we look at the mental capacity. But it is important that they appreciate the benefits, the risks involved, and also the goods that come with the vaccination.
So to sort of clarify it all, if a child has the mental capacity, so let's just say for argument's sake a 15-year-old, the 15-year-old says, I want to go and get a vaccine, their parent doesn't have the legal right to stop them?
Well, in that instance, the parent can raise objections. So if there is an objection from the parent, what then needs to happen is that the matter needs to be referred. Based on the grounds for the objection on the part of the parent, then the matter will need to be transferred to the legal head, the head of legal. At that particular institution, who can then in turn refer the matter or petition the court for a ruling on that matter, or to transfer or refer the matter to the Minister of Health for determination. So the parent is within his or her rights to raise the objections, and you let the institution then take it up in line with what is prescribed by the Act.
Okay, I mean, that's actually quite a lengthy process then. So it's not as simple as saying, as a child saying, I want, and a parent saying, no, you can't, and the child getting what they want. It's actually much more complicated than that. In the end, someone over the age of 18, a health official, the minister themselves, would make the decision.
Yes, no, certainly. But this is because when it comes to these issues, the overriding principle is that of the best interest of the child. So the health institution as well as the head of department cannot just dismiss what could potentially be valid objections by the parent. So those objections and need serious consideration from the parent side. So then you let the court decide, or the Minister of Health to decide.
In a strange way, I'm not aware of any case law around an argument in our country of a child wanting a vaccine specifically and a parent saying no. Are you aware of any? Is there case law specifically around vaccines? You pointed to case law around mental competence for children. That does make sense. But has this happened before where there's actually been a legal dispute that went to court?
Not that I am aware of, but I cannot exclude the chance, or rather the possibility that there may be a case law in this regard. But I did a thorough research in this instance, and I could not find one. But given the fact that this is not the first pandemic that we've faced in history, as the world, we cannot entirely exclude that possibility.
It's a big world. There are a lot of courts out there, and there are, I'm sure, if you don't mind me saying so, an awful lot of lawyers. Are there, so if I remember the context of the Children's Act, and this may be important or it may be relevant, when the Children's Act was being discussed in Parliament, the current Children's Act, and I remember the arguments at the time were primarily around abortion, and what many people found very controversial, I think it is controversial, is that a parent could not stop a child from having an abortion, and that's where the idea of a child having the say over their own body rather than their parent became important. And again, my rusty memory suggests that one of the reasons that people proposed the Children's Act to contain the legislation that it does is in a bid, I suppose, to perhaps stop teenage pregnancies was one of the aims, if I remember the health department saying at the time. What I'm trying to say is this a law that was created for one situation when people hadn't really thought that the idea of legal arguments over whether a child could consent to a vaccine or not wasn't really what the people who passed the legislation were thinking about?
Yes, yeah. So when it comes to the issue of teenage pregnancy, you will have to have regard. Well, your primary legislation there will be your termination. Well, it's the choice on termination of Pregnancy Act, which does not really prescribe the age of a girl or a woman. Sorry. In that instance, it just says a woman who's pregnant. So in that instance, it is more about the bodily integrity of the child, because at the end of the day, that if a child, someone below the age of 18, conceives and has to give birth, then at the end of the day, the responsibility lies with that particular child. And also, given the the socio-economic circumstances, and we know how some of the teenage pregnancies come about, so there may be room to argue that at the end of the day, we need to protect the teenagers also. So with that, in the interpretation of that section of the Choice on Termination of Pregnancy Act, we obviously need to also draw in the Children's Act when it comes to the consent of the child. In which case, it would be difficult, or rather not so clear to say that this particular section of the Children's Act had anything to do with teenage pregnancy, because that is catered for by a specific legislation. Okay,
I understand you. Thank you. In a way, I understand why this is such a controversial discussion. It's a really rich conversation because there's a lot to talk about when you talk about children, vaccinations, and parents. But in real life, you're probably not going to find many times when children and parents disagree on vaccinations. In most cases, they're probably going to be on the same page, I'd like to think.
No, certainly. That is quite so, because in most instances you will find that this discussion will not even reach the vaccination site, where the healthcare giver has to sit down the child and the parent to discuss this issue. It will be decided at home to say that the child is going or the child is not going. It will be very, very in seldom instances where the child would insist to say, I am going, contrary to or against the views and the decisions of the parents.
Thanks very much indeed, Senior Associate at Adams & Adams. I really appreciate the discussion, the wisdom that you bring. Thank you very much indeed.